The truck stop outside Amarillo was where I got the call that changed the schedule. 18 months driving long haul between Dallas and Albuquerque, and I'd learned to read the weather the same way I read traffic patterns, slowly, carefully, with both hands on the wheel. But that October morning, the dispatcher told me the I-40 bridge inspection was going to close the route for 5 days minimum. A water main failure had undermined the eastbound support. Nothing I could do. Go home, Lawrence. Come back Thursday. I'd been gone 11 days that rotation. I didn't call ahead, partly because my phone battery was at 6% and I'd left my charger in the cab, partly because I liked the idea of surprising my son. Caleb was 10, and at 10 years old, a dad walking through the door unexpectedly still felt like Christmas morning. What I didn't account for was that Caleb might not be home. The house looked right from the outside. My wife Donna's car was in the driveway. The flower boxes she'd planted last spring were still there, brown and dried out now, which wasn't like her. Donna had a thing about those flowers. She watered them obsessively. I figured she'd just gotten busy. The front door was unlocked. Donna was in the kitchen, on the phone, laughing at something. When she turned and saw me, the laugh stopped like someone had cut a wire. "Lawrence, you're not supposed to be back until Thursday." "Bridge closed. Where's Caleb?" She set her phone face down on the counter. "He's at that program I told you about. The one through Cross Timbers Community Fellowship." Remember? I didn't remember. 11 days in a cab meant phone calls that got dropped over mountain passes, voicemails I listened to at 2 in the morning in truck stop parking lots. The details of Donna's life had been reaching me in fragments for months. What program? The youth development one. Pastor Hollis runs it. It's like a working ranch. They learn responsibility, animal husbandry, practical skills. Caleb was struggling in school, and I thought the structure would help him. "How long has he been there?" She paused. 3 weeks. 3 weeks. 3 weeks. And nobody told me clearly enough for me to remember. 3 weeks, and my son was at a working ranch run by a pastor I'd never met. Something moved through me that I couldn't name yet. "Give me the address." "Lawrence, you can't just show up. The program has rules about family visits. It disrupts the children's focus." Pastor Hollis says, "Give me the address, Donna." She gave it to me. Her voice had gone flat, the way it did when she'd already decided something and knew she was going to have to defend it. "Cross Timbers Road, mile marker 14, about 60 miles northwest." She said it like she was reading off a grocery list. I was already picking up my keys. The drive took an hour and 15 minutes because the last 20 miles were on county roads that my GPS couldn't track properly. Red dirt roads that my GPS couldn't track properly. Red dirt roads that turned to caliche and then to nothing recognizable. I passed a cattle gate with a hand-painted sign that said, "Cross Timbers Youth Leadership Ranch" in dark green letters. The lettering was neat, professional. That should have reassured me. It didn't. The property was larger than I expected. A main building that looked like a converted farmhouse, a barn, several outbuildings, and beyond all of that, open fields that stretched toward a tree line a half-mile out. I counted the outbuildings. 7. A man in his 40s met me in the gravel lot before I'd fully gotten out of the truck. He had the careful smile of someone who'd practiced it. "You must be a parent. We don't typically allow unscheduled visits, but I'd be happy to. Where are the kids?" He blinked. "They're completing their afternoon responsibilities. If you'll just come inside, I can explain the program structure and we can schedule a proper." "I want to see my son." Caleb Greer. "He's been here 3 weeks." The man's smile didn't waver, but something behind his eyes shifted. I've seen that shift in enough truck stop conversations and way station arguments to know what it means. Recalculation. I'm not the kind of problem he knew how to solve quickly. I walked past him toward the fields. He called something behind me. I didn't stop. The barn blocked my line of sight for about 30 yards. When I came around the east side of it, I saw the fields. They were hay fields, late season, and there were children moving through them. Not playing, working. They were using scythes, actual hand scythes, the kind I'd seen in history books, and raking the cut hay into windrows. I counted 9 kids visible from where I stood. Maybe more beyond the tree line. The smallest one couldn't have been more than 8 years old. It was 71 degrees, but the sun was direct and there was no shade in those fields. Every child was wearing long-sleeved shirts. Most of them had their heads down, not talking. I found Caleb in the 4th row. I knew him from his posture first. The way he held his left shoulder slightly higher than his right. Something he'd done since he was 4. Then I saw his face. Sunburned across the nose and cheeks despite the long sleeves. His hands, where they gripped the rake handle, were wrapped in what looked like athletic tape that had gone gray with dirt. He looked up when my shadow crossed his row. For a second, he just stared, like he was deciding whether I was real. Then his face crumpled. "Dad." He dropped the rake and ran at me. He was 10 years old, and I hadn't really thought of him as small in a long time. But when I caught him, he felt like he weighed nothing. He grabbed the front of my jacket with both fists and didn't let go. "Dad, I didn't think you were coming. They said you knew about this and you were okay with it. They said," his voice broke. I held on. "They said you thought I needed to be fixed. That you and Mom talked about it and decided I had to stay until the program said I was ready." "That's not true. They said it was. They said if I kept asking about you, it meant I wasn't progressing and I'd have to stay longer." I looked up over his head. The man with the practiced smile had followed me. He was standing at the field's edge with 2 other men I hadn't seen before. The other children had stopped working. They were watching us. Some of them with an expression I recognized from the faces of kids who have learned that watching carefully is the safest thing you can do. One girl, maybe 12, had her arms wrapped around herself despite the warmth. She was watching Caleb the way you watch someone doing something you've imagined doing but didn't believe was possible. "Sir," the man with the practiced smile called out, "I'm going to need you to step away from Caleb. You're disrupting the afternoon schedule." I picked my son up. He was heavy. He'd grown, I realized, in the 11 days since I'd last seen him, but I managed. He locked his arms around my neck. "How long has he been sleeping here?" "Sir, answer the question." "The residents stay in the bunkhouse during the program period. For immersion purposes, family contact is immersion." I said the word back to him and watched him hear it the way I heard it, like it was the wrong word for what was actually happening. I walked toward my truck with Caleb still in my arms. The man followed at a distance, talking, explaining program philosophy, talking about consent forms and partnership agreements and the liability of unauthorized removal. I want to note the phrase he used, unauthorized removal, for a parent carrying his 10-year-old son. "Dad," Caleb said quietly against my shoulder. "Don't put me down. Please don't put me down." "I'm not putting you down. What about the others?" I didn't have an answer for that yet. 2 more men had appeared between me and the parking area. They weren't blocking me exactly, but they were standing in a way that made the path narrower than it needed to be. I kept walking. One of them put a hand on my arm. I removed it. I'm 190 pounds of someone who's been loading and securing cargo for 18 months. The hand came off. "Caleb," I said quietly. "Close your eyes." He did. I made it to the truck. I put Caleb in the passenger seat. He immediately pulled his knees up to his chest. His sneakers were worn through at the toe in a way that told me he'd been wearing them every single day with no break. The man with the practiced smile was at my window now. His name was Preston Hollis. I'd find out later. He had a bachelor's in business and a self-issued ministry certification from an online organization. He ran programs like this one at 3 properties across 2 counties. "Mr. Greer," he said. His voice had shifted. Quieter now, harder underneath. "Caleb is here under a signed agreement. His legal guardian enrolled him. If you remove him without authorization, I will call the sheriff and you will face charges for violating a contracted youth services arrangement. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Call them." He stared at me. Call the sheriff right now, please. Something in his composure slipped. He hadn't expected that response. People who run operations like his count on parents being afraid of the system, on parents assuming the official-looking paperwork outweighs their instincts. He'd handed me a threat and I'd handed it back and asked him to follow through on it. He took out his phone. I took out mine and called 911 myself. The dispatcher asked me to describe the situation. I described it. Children performing agricultural labor on a private ranch under the supervision of adults, using phrases like unauthorized removal to describe a father picking up his son. I described Caleb's hands. I described the worn-through sneakers. I described the girl with her arms wrapped around herself in the warm afternoon sun. The first county sheriff's deputy arrived in 22 minutes. She was maybe 30, with the particular calm of someone who'd learned to take in a scene completely before drawing any conclusions. She looked at Caleb in my passenger seat. She looked at the men standing in the lot. She looked at Preston Hollis, who had arranged his expression back into something cooperative and regretful. She asked Hollis for a tour. He said that would require a warrant for the residential areas. She said probable cause was sitting right there in that field, and she'd like to see the bunkhouse anyway, and the way she said it didn't leave him a lot of room. What they found took the rest of the afternoon and most of the evening to fully document. 15 children in 2 bunk rooms with cots bolted to the walls. A chore chart that started at 5:30 in the morning and ran until 7 at night with a 45-minute break for lunch. Logbooks showing each child's labor output, measured in bales and acreage. A financial account showing that Hollis had been selling the hay to 3 separate feed and supply companies in the region, none of whom had asked questions about labor sourcing. Caleb told the deputy that they weren't allowed to call home during the first month. For adjustment purposes, Hollis had told them. After that, they could earn phone privileges through work performance. Caleb had earned 1 5-minute call in 3 weeks. He'd called home. Donna had told him he was doing great and that she was proud of him and that he needed to trust the process. He thought that meant I knew. He thought I'd agree to it. I sat with him in my truck while the investigation unfolded around us. He'd stopped crying, but he held my hand the entire time, the way he used to when he was 6 and we'd cross busy parking lots together. I didn't say anything about it. I just held on. A paramedic checked him over. Mild dehydration, she said. Blistering on both palms consistent with repetitive tool use. Bruised right shoulder, origin unclear. She wanted to take him to the hospital in Amarillo. Caleb looked at me. Can you come? I'll be right behind you the whole way. He thought about it. Okay, but you can't go back to driving yet. I'm not going anywhere. I called Donna from the parking lot while the ambulance was getting ready to leave. She answered on the second ring. She'd clearly heard something had happened. Lawrence, what? Did you read what you signed? She went quiet. Did you read any of it? Did you ask to visit? Did you ask what they ate? What their days looked like? Did you ask to speak to other parents who'd sent kids there? I asked Preston. I asked Pastor Hollis. He said it was like a summer camp. He said Caleb would come back focused and confident. He had testimonials on his website, Lawrence. There were photos of kids smiling. Our son thought I abandoned him. He thought we both decided he wasn't worth keeping home. The silence after that was very long. Donna arrived at the hospital around 8. She came into the room where Caleb was on an IV, getting fluids, and looked at him and then at the bandaging on his hands, and something in her face broke open in a way I hadn't seen since before things between us had started going wrong. Caleb looked at her for a long time. I want to go home, he said finally. She nodded. She couldn't talk. The investigation moved quickly once Child Protective Services got involved. Preston Hollis had been operating what his paperwork called a youth character development program for 6 years. He had agreements with 41 families across the region. Some were parents who genuinely believed the program was therapeutic. Some were families in crisis who had been actively recruited through school counselors and church networks that Hollis had cultivated deliberately. Some had signed custody arrangements they hadn't fully understood. The state labor board found that Hollis had earned approximately $280,000 in agricultural revenue over 3 years using unpaid child labor. The hay went to legitimate businesses. The paper trail was clean until it wasn't. He was arrested 11 days after I carried Caleb out of that field. Federal charges, child labor violations, fraud, and false imprisonment. His assistant, a man named Terrence, who'd been running the day-to-day ranch operations, took a plea deal and testified against him. Donna was not charged criminally. The DA determined she'd been genuinely deceived, though the civil liability questions took longer to resolve. She'd recruited 2 other families from our neighborhood. Those families sued the program and eventually received settlements from Hollis's seized assets. Donna cooperated fully with everyone who asked her anything. I don't know what to say about her still. She'd wanted to help our son. She'd trusted the wrong person and hadn't checked carefully enough. That's true, and it's also not the whole story of what went wrong between us. Caleb started therapy 2 weeks after he came home. His therapist was a woman who specialized in children who'd experienced institutional trauma. Her phrase, which took me a while to understand fully. Caleb wouldn't talk much for the first month. He'd come home from sessions and go straight to his room. He used to build things. Lego sets, cardboard constructions, elaborate systems of ramps and tracks that took up the entire living room floor. After cross timbers, he wouldn't touch any of it. His hands hurt, he said, even after they healed. The thing that broke me was the morning about 6 weeks after he came home, when I walked past his room and heard him crying quietly. I knocked. He let me in. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, looking at his Lego bins. He said, "I keep thinking if I start building something, it means I've stopped earning my keep." I sat down next to him. Where did that phrase come from? Hollis used to say it. If you weren't working, you weren't earning your place. If you asked to rest, you were being lazy, and lazy people didn't deserve comfort. I said, "You don't have to earn anything here. This is your home. You belong here because you're my son, not because of what you produce." He leaned into me. We sat there for a while. He didn't open the Lego bins that morning, but he didn't close his bedroom door either, which was more than he'd done in weeks. The trial took 8 months. I'd adjusted my routing by then. Shorter hauls, home every 3 or 4 nights. The trucking company worked with me when I explained the situation. Unions protect more than wages, it turns out. Hollis's defense argued that the program had provided genuine educational value, that agricultural work built character, that all agreements had been signed by consenting guardians. The testimonies of the children dismantled that argument methodically. Caleb didn't have to testify. His therapist advised against it, and the prosecution had enough without him, but 3 other children did. A 13-year-old girl named Daisy testified for 40 minutes about a room called the reflection chamber, which was a storage closet where children who asked too many questions were sent to spend the night. She was calm the entire time she testified. The jury watched her with expressions that made the verdict feel like a foregone conclusion. Hollis got 32 years. Terrence got 8, suspended in part for cooperation. 2 other staff members received sentences between 4 and 12 years. Donna and I separated formally about a year after the arrest. I want to be honest about that. What happened with Caleb wasn't the only thing wrong between us, and it would be easy to make it the reason when the truth is more complicated and less dramatic than that. We'd been failing each other quietly for a while before any of this. She moved to her sister's place in Fort Worth. Caleb lives with me during the school year. With her in summers, real summers, not programs, not ranches. He started building again. It happened so gradually I almost missed when it started. A few pieces on his desk one morning. A small structure by the window a week later. Then one Saturday I came home and the living room floor was covered in an elaborate landscape he'd constructed, buildings, roads, a system of bridges that connected everything. I asked him what it was. He thought about it. "A place where everything connects," he said. "Like if you don't know how to get somewhere, you can always find a way there." The school counselor, a different one, at his new school, a woman I'd vetted carefully before Caleb ever walked through those doors, called me in March of his 5th grade year to tell me he'd written a story for class about a boy who built bridges. She wanted to know if she could submit it to a district writing competition. She asked carefully, checking to make sure the subject matter wasn't something he needed to keep private. He can decide, I told her. It's his story. He submitted it. He didn't win, but his teacher read it aloud to the class, and afterward 2 other kids came up to him and said they'd been through something similar. Different programs, different states, same language about earning your place, same isolation from family. Caleb came home and told me about it. He seemed unsettled and not exactly in a bad way. More like someone who'd expected to be alone with something and discovered they weren't. There are more kids like me, he said. A lot more, I told him. That's why it matters that you wrote it down. He nodded. He went to his room and I heard him building for a while before dinner. I volunteer now with an organization that trains educators and school counselors to recognize the recruitment patterns that programs like Hollis's used. It's not complicated work, but it's specific. The red flags are consistent, programs that discourage or delay parental contact during an initial adjustment period, facilities that will not provide physical addresses before enrollment, consent forms with liability waivers buried in pages of program philosophy, staff who respond to parent questions with language about trust and the importance of not undermining the process. Legitimate programs want you involved. Programs that don't want you there have reasons for that. The thing I say at every training, the thing I mean when I say it, you know your kid. You know their handwriting and their posture and the way they carry their shoulders. Trust that. The paperwork is not smarter than you are. The credential on the wall is not smarter than what you feel when something isn't right. I drove 60 miles on a county road on a dead battery because something felt wrong, and that drive was the most important thing I ever did. About 2 years after the trial ended, I got a message through the nonprofit from the mother of the girl Adaze who had testified. Her daughter was doing well, her mother wrote. She was in 7th grade. She joined the school debate team because, she told her mother, she'd already testified in federal court, so standing up in front of people didn't scare her anymore. I read that message in a truck stop parking lot outside of Tucson and laughed for the first time in a long time. A few months after that, Caleb asked me if we could drive out to where the ranch had been. I wasn't sure about it, but he asked thoughtfully, not impulsively, the way he'd started doing things since therapy, thinking through what he wanted before he asked for it. The property had been sold. The bunkhouses were gone. Someone had converted it to a regular working ranch. Cattle by the look of the fencing we could see from the road. The hand-painted sign was gone. Caleb looked at it for a while from the truck window. "Looks different," he said. "Is that okay?" He shrugged, but not in a dismissive way. In the way of someone deciding something. Yeah, it should look different. It was a bad place. It doesn't need to look like what it was. We drove home. He fell asleep somewhere around the 2nd County Road junction, which was the same way he'd fallen asleep on long drives since he was a toddler. Out completely, no warning. The way only kids and people who finally learned to feel safe can sleep. I kept driving. The road was empty and the sky was the specific color it gets in the Texas Panhandle just before full dark, not quite purple and not quite gray. It's a color I'd never seen anywhere else, and never tried to describe to anyone because some things are only true when you're in them. I thought about the years I'd spent gone, the weeks adding up into months, the way absence becomes its own kind of presence in a family, the shape of everything arranged around the empty chair. I told myself the money was worth it, that stability was the thing my son needed most, that being a good provider was being a good father. I'd been wrong about that and right about it simultaneously, which is the kind of thing that takes a long time to sit with. But I'd come home when the road closed. I'd gone looking when something felt wrong. I'd held on when they told me to let go. That's not nothing. A kid in the seat beside me who was sleeping without nightmares, who was building bridges again, who'd written a story about connection and submitted it with his name on it. That was the proof of what showing up could do. Even late, even imperfect, Even after a lot of miles and a lot of wrong turns. He'd forgiven me for the absences before I asked him to, which was more grace than I'd earned. I wasn't going to waste it. The image that stayed with me longest wasn't from the ranch. It was from about 6 weeks after we came home. Caleb sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at his Lego bins, telling me he was afraid to build something because building meant he'd stopped earning his keep. That's what Hollis had planted in him. Not just exhaustion, not just fear. The idea that rest was a moral failure. I think about the chain of choices that led to that moment. Not Hollis's choices. Those are easy to trace and easy to condemn. I mean my own. Months of being gone, phone calls that dropped over mountain passes, details about my son's life reaching me in fragments. I'd told myself that providing financially was the same thing as being present, that stability was a form of love. It is a form of love, but it isn't the whole thing, and I've been using it as a substitute for the whole thing, and somewhere in that gap, Donna had made a desperate decision and trusted the wrong person. What I'd come to understand is that the people who run operations like Hollis's don't succeed because they're unusually clever. They succeed because they find families who are already stretched thin, parents who are exhausted, who feel guilty, who want so badly to do right by their kids that they'll trust someone who sounds authoritative and has a professional-looking website. They count on that exhaustion. They count on good people being too tired to ask the follow-up questions. The only thing that cut through it was a road closure and a feeling I couldn't name. I want to be careful about how I say this, because I'm not interested in making myself the hero of what happened. I almost wasn't there. If the bridge inspection had gone differently, Caleb would have spent the whole summer in that bunkhouse. But I was there, and when something felt wrong, I followed that feeling instead of talking myself out of it. That's not heroism. That's just refusing to override what you know. Caleb is different now than he was before Cross Timbers. Some of that difference is hard. He thinks before he trusts. He watches adults carefully before he relaxes around them. His therapist says that's appropriate protective adaptation, which is a clinical way of saying he learned something real about the world and his nervous system adjusted accordingly. I don't try to talk him out of it. What I try to do is show him, consistently and over time, that watchfulness and openness can coexist, that learning to read people carefully doesn't have to mean closing off entirely. The bridges he builds with his Lego sets are more structurally sophisticated now than they were before. He tests the load-bearing points. He thinks about failure modes. I notice that, and I don't say anything about it, but I notice it. There's a version of this story where I make it about what was done to him, and that version is true. What Hollis did was a crime, and the sentence reflected that, and the other children who testified deserved every bit of the justice that followed. But the version I carry with me most is smaller than that. It's my son falling asleep in the truck on the drive home, completely out, no warning. The way you only sleep when you finally feel safe. It's him opening the Lego bins again. It's him submitting a story about bridges with his name on it. You don't earn your place in your family by what you produce. You belong because you belong. That's the thing I should have said more earlier, before absence made it easy for someone else to say the opposite. I say it now. I'll keep saying it. That's the work that's actually left.